Okay, guys?
Yeah, starting recording, it's showing. Okay.
Okay, perfect. All right, here it goes. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And today we are rejoined by Orinoco Tribune's Saheli Chowdury, part of the editorial team of Orinoco Tribune, which covers Latin American and international affairs, always from a critical left perspective. But tonight we'll be discussing all things India, and let's get right to it. But first off, Saheli, thanks for coming back on and to discuss the history and current affairs of your home country of India.
Thanks a lot to you for inviting me for, I think, is the third time? Or maybe even more, I don't know.
I believe it's actually could even be a fourth time, because first time was with
first time was with Jesus, second time was with the team.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, first time was with Jesus.
I feel like I'm becoming a regular.
Excuse me?
I said I'm becoming a regular.
Yes, exactly.
Regular.
Yes. Exactly. No. Exactly. You're one of our how should we say? Right. You're one of our returning champions, as as I would say. And then just before we start talking about India, I just wanted to, in case people don't know, but on September the 21st, I'm going to be moderating a debate between two past guests, David Swanson of World Beyond War and Arnold August of the Canada Files, and who also does a lot of work with regular commentator on Telesur and Press TV. And we're going to be having a debate on if wars are ever justifiable. And what's going to be interesting about this debate is that it's going to be between two anti-imperialists. So we're going to be so when it comes to the issue on if wars are ever justifiable, what about indigenous resistance? What about Palestinian resistance? Yeah, so it's going to be a very interesting debate from an anti-imperialist perspective rather than a peacemonger versus a warmonger, and and all that stuff. And I even got a shirt of World Beyond War that I hope people can see, and just to promote it and all that, and all that jazz. All right, but let's get back to what we are going to talk about, which is India. And I've been wanting to do a program on India for a long time. So thank you so much, Saheli, for agreeing to it. Let's get into it. So the first question I'd love to talk to you about, regarding India is this. Now, India is a country which I guess arguably you could say it's still grossly underdeveloped, and there still is a hideous gap between the super rich and very much the destitute poor. And the reason behind that, is that because of the caste system and the fact that India adopted more or less a liberal democratic model of British colonialism? And then also, can you explain what the caste system is in response to why there is such a huge gap between, the rich and the poor of India?
The reason behind the huge gap, wealth gap between the rich and the poor in India are manifold, because the caste system would be one reason. It could be the base on which everything else is built. But at present, the present extreme inequality, which was not even seen in the 20th century when there were colonialism everywhere in the world, even in that period of time, this sort of inequality was not seen in India, which is seen today. I would say it's because of neoliberalism, opening up the economy. Now, just when I say opening up now, a lot of people might say that you could be in the international trade. Now, India has been in international trade since before Europe was. Okay, so it has been in international trade for over 4,000 years. However, the thing that I'm going to talk about is opening to the West, to the same powers that had colonized India, and then they are doing the same thing that they had been doing, which is wealth drain. So this civilization and whatever profit goes into the super rich, those who own the resources. So these are the many different extreme inequalities present in India. And I'll just give a very small example of inequality. Then I'll go into what the caste system is. That's a huge thing. So I try to explain it in a very within a very short time. But let's see. So just a very small example of the inequality is that in 2020, that's the year of the pandemic. Even today is the year of the pandemic, but 2020 was the beginning. So even in 2020, in India, the 73% of the national production, like the GDP, went into the hands of the richest 1%. So 73% going into the hands of the richest 1% makes India one of the most unequal countries in the world in terms of wealth. Like it's in the level of Chile, let's say, because that's also a very unequal country in terms of wealth distribution. So that's the sort of disparity in India. Now coming to the caste system and why I say it's the pain is that
okay, but actually, but just to interrupt. So basically, the reason why, well, one of the reasons why India has this grotesque gap between, I would say, the super rich and the destitute poor, as well as and the working class, the working poor, is part of that, is because of British colonialism plays a part in that. But the fact of the matter is even after independence or nominal independence, that system, that world economic system, international trade system, which India was a part of, because that system is, I guess you could say, because that system is still capitalism, that's why you still have that in India.
Yeah, I'll say that because if you need to be in the international system, of course you can do many things which India did at one point of time in order to protect the internal economy or at least industrialization and that sort of thing. Like all countries in the world are in the international trade and everything. So they're in many international institutions that are actually capitalist institutions in the hands of the Western capitalists and in the hands of, let's say, the richest, the biggest corporations. So it's not like that being in the trade system, international system, makes you a country of inequality. Like you can do things with which you can palliate those effects, but neoliberalism wants every country not to do those things. So you have to open the economy to a so-called free trade, which is not free at all, and which actually keeps countries like ours in the same underdeveloped situation, so that we continue to export raw materials at low prices and buy back the same powers at higher price. What capitalism, colonialism was also that it did the same thing. Like British colonialism, since you come to the question of British colonialism, also remember that in Bengal, which is my place, was the first place to be colonized. Now, a lot of people might not know or might, that Bengal had an excellent weaving and handloom industry. Okay, so the British did not want this industry to compete, like Indian muslin, which was called muslin. It was actually Bengal muslin, and it used to be shipped to Europe, or in those times it was not shipping, it went through the Silk Route. So the Silk Route went from the extreme east of Asia into west of Europe. So even in the parts of Silk Route also exist in Spain, in Portugal, etc., in Greece. So Indian cloth, like the muslin cloth from Bengal, which used to go in Spanish and Portuguese, etc., used to sell it to the British, and they would also get the money in high prices.
Can you repeat that again about where Bengal trade happened?
Bengal trade used to happen. Bengal, the cities of Bengal, the place was part of the ancient Silk Route. So the ancient Silk Route, whenever you think of Silk Route, you think of China, of course, but those ancient trade routes, there is not one, there are many, and there are many branches. So those ancient trade routes went from the extreme east of Asia, like from the extreme eastern part of China, through parts of India, which is today India. It went through parts of Afghanistan, parts Iran, Iraq, Syria, every country. Okay, through Turkey into Europe. Okay, so then it was in Greece, it was in Portugal, it was in Spain, Italy, etc. So the southern part of Europe and the northern part of Africa also, these were all connected by the ancient trade routes. So it was called the Silk Road because silk and other very precious and like valuable cloth used to go through this route, but there were also precious metals, stones, and there were also spices. So everything that was valuable in ancient times and Middle Ages used to go through these routes into Europe. So Asia was actually once upon a time the warehouse of the world. Things were produced here and then it used to go to Europe. Europe was not industrialized. Now after the Industrial Revolution, which was like the center of which was Britain, industries to compete with theirs. That was actually the basis of colonialism, that they colonized these places, destroyed the industries so that there would be no competitor left. So that was colonialism, and why I call the present day thing neo-colonialism, not I, everybody calls it neo-colonialism, is because those Europeans, and of course US is the biggest power now, they continue to do the same. So they would destroy industries in countries that had some industrializations after their independence from colonial roots. India did have a lot of it, still has. India actually, like India is among the G20 best 20 economies in the world, not because we're sending raw materials to the West. No, India is also an industrialized country, and it used to be more industrialized after the independence. And I'll say why. Like after independence, India was closer to the USSR than to the West, because like USSR had been national liberation movements of all countries in Asia and Africa. So all these countries, after they had gained all these countries had good diplomatic, trade relations, exchange of technologies, exchange of scientific ideas and everything from the USSR. So India used to get a lot of aid and a lot of like money, and with Soviet expertise, India had set up a lot of industries. So big industries like iron and steel, like and the production of a lot of things like trucks and tractors, etc. So, of course, that did not mean that the income inequality was going away, because India had not did not follow our socialist model. It tried to balance between that model and the Western democracy. So it was a social democratic stuff. So you can understand. I mean, Europeans will understand what social democracy is. So that means that in India, wealth was still getting concentrated in the hands of the super rich, but the government also had social welfare policies. The biggest of which was a public distribution system of food, in order to ensure that the people of the country was getting the minimum required nutrition. I'm not saying that it worked, because it was not implemented properly, but the idea was there. Similarly, India had this 5 years planning, just like the Soviets had planning with a planning commission. So India had a planning commission that has been dismantled. So and with every 5-year plan, you would have new industries, you would have new techniques in agriculture, you would have like a lot of funds going into education, especially higher education. They were not looking at the primary education, that was bad, because you have to start from the beginning or the base. But yes, a lot of funds used to go into research and development and higher education, because they wanted to make India into technical scientific country, to be able to compete with Europe and stuff like that. So that was around starting from the 60s and going until the late 80s. Okay, India had also nationalized mines, the biggest industries, banks, everything. So nationalizing these things, like which generate the most wealth, made it possible for the government to have more money in order to spend in these things, everything, like from social welfare to education to health. And despite all this, there were problems that the government did not want to touch. And a biggest of that is, of course, we come back to the caste system, because it is on this that land holding depends. And India being a big agroeconomy dependent country, land and land holding is very important. So if you want higher agricultural production, there are two ways. One would be to give farmers the land so that they can produce, and then you, of course, you give them the support, you give them seeds, you give them, make irrigation possible where it is necessary, and also you procure their products so that you can put those things in the public distribution system, and also ensure that nothing is ever lacking in the market. And also, if you have a lot of produce, you can sell to other countries and earn foreign income. That's one way, which India used to do, partly. And then there is another way, which is done in the West, is that pooling all like large amounts of lands and giving it to the big, what we call the big ag, and then they would produce industrially a lot of food, and that can be sold, which is done in the US and which is also done in Europe. So these are the two things. Now in India, they wanted to implement the first one, but in order to do that, you would need to do what is called an agrarian reform, and the first step of the agrarian reform would be equitable distribution of land, so that those who are farmers, those who are tillers of the land, would not be landless themselves. Now, why in India, whenever the question of India comes up, a lot of people mention landless farmers. Now, why are the farmers landless? That would be the question. But why are the farmers landless? So somebody else holds the land, right? In India, this thing happens because of the out of the caste system, which is almost 2,000 years old. Okay, so it's a 2,000-year-old system, but it's still strong. Now, what happened was that this thing started to come up around 100 AD, okay, like the 1st century AD. So it is the phase of the Aryan migration was more, okay, we also say who the Aryans were. Like India is the biggest melting pot in the world. There have been like all kinds of races.
Wait a minute, Saheli. We're having a lot of. There seems to be a lot of problems on the Skype. There always seems to be a delay. Should we stop recording and see if it's if the connection's better on Zoom by any chance?
The connection is connection on Zoom. I'll tell you why. We are in a near blackout situation. Okay, so we are having a very bad, let's say, electricity supply.
Okay, all right. Well, all right then. All right. Well, all right. We'll try to continue the best we can then, and then worst comes to worst, we'll do a re-interview. But for now, I got you right now. So, all right. So you were saying about the caste system.
Yes, how the caste system originated and all that. So India, I was saying that India is the biggest melting pot in the world. Like it has the most diverse gene pool in the world. All sorts of people came into India over the years. So the Aryans, I was talking about the Aryans, were people who had come from the foothills of the Ural Mountains, and just like they had gone into Europe, they had also come into India. And in the first phase, there were two phases of the migration. One just around the beginning of, like, say, or just first or second AD. So that was the first migration. Okay, like that was more. If we are using today's words, that
these migrants
was more
and these migrants were coming from all sorts of neighboring countries and whatnots.
Well, from all over Asia and parts of Europe also.
Okay.
The out of Africa migration. So because migration, like when it settled, it was in South Asia. So that was also like everybody had come into India first. So like the first Indians were Africans, and then there were many others. So that when the Aryan people were there, okay. So of course there will be many other migrations also later, but in the within the 1st century AD, the Aryans would be taking over most of North India, and then of course whenever somebody is becoming rich and powerful, they would want to remain rich and powerful. So in order to do that, you have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
on the color of the people's skin, they would try to group people.
Uh-oh.
Okay,
Oh,
so
okay, yeah. So, sorry, there's a bit of delay. So the caste system, they even so the caste system, there actually was a racial element to it. So, and yeah, and
it
yeah,
has a racial element. Yeah, it does have a racial element to it. Of course, correct. So it is based on race. If we are using today's language, like I said, so the ones who would be most Aryans. Now, I must say that even the most Aryans would not be more than 10% Aryans. But even then, those who are most Aryans would be the people who would have all the best things. The next class would be the people who were the warriors, who would also become kings and princes and all that. So, and then were the people who would be farmers or small traders. And then the lowest class were all the people who were doing all the manual labor. So the working class, the working poor, originated from there. So you had like most of the people in a very low caste, like a lot of them would be untouchable, and untouchability still exists in India.
Dalits, yeah.
That's now all Dalits are not untouchable. Some are. So even among the lowest castes, there are many different subcastes, and and those who are in power always try to create divisions among them. So there will be some who are untouchable. There will be some others who could go into the rich people's house and work there. So they were not untouchable. Those who are untouchable would not be allowed to have water from the place where everybody else could. They would not be allowed to congregate where everybody else could. They would not be allowed to walk through streets in the villages. They would be living outside, and they would be living in the worst lands. So they would be living in the marshes. They would be living close to rivers, places that would get flooded in the monsoon. They would be living close to crematoriums or burial grounds, etc. So that is the sort of system. So these people would not have land, you can imagine. So most people did not have land. So that was the basis. That was how the caste system was, that it was actually a system of concentration of wealth in the hands of the few and making most of the people poor. And then after that, you'd have the feudal system. Feudalism actually originated from that place only. So in the feudal system, you're seeing the people who are owning the land are not the people who are doing the work. Okay, so they just own the land, and those others who do not own the land used to go into the lands of these big landholders and work there, give their manual labor, and they they were just made into bonded laborers through lies. They will say that you are not doing work properly, you have to work more, you like do all the work that is in
I
backlog.
believe the term is I believe the term is sort of like indentured
Yes.
servitude.
Yes, it's indentured servitude, though it does not even have to be serfs. And these people would be working in these lands. Like they were supposed to do this, and then the thing was that it was sort of slavery, because their children would have to do the same thing that their parents were doing, and their children would be doing the same. So this is how the system would be perpetuated. Of course, systems break. So in the Middle Ages, these systems were breaking in most parts of India. And then after that, after colonialism, it was breaking even more. But that did not mean that it was doing anything good. It just made a larger working class, a larger working poor. And
so then,
into the independent India.
But then, so that being said, was it easy for the British colonialists to divide and conquer India due to the caste system, which is closely linked to the majority Hindu population? and were many Muslims, Sikhs, and others who wanted to be free of the caste system, especially the Dalits. Were some of them willing to work with the British, thinking that this was their way of breaking the caste system, but really they were just divide and conquer, and then just subjects to
divide and conquer
British
did not
colonialism.
Divide and conquer did not originate from there. So those who are rich, those who had the land, they were the ones who were collaborating with the British, because why would they touch the caste system? Why would they touch anything? They could use, like all colonizer, what all colonizers do is that they want a local government or a sub-government which will help them to conquer the rest of the country, which will also help them to population whenever they are trying to break free of their school. So what the British did was, all these rich landholders, all these princes, like most of them, I'm not saying all, but most of them actually collaborated with the British. The British said that I'm not going to touch your wealth. What you will do is you will just give me taxes. Now you will be collecting the taxes from your own poor people. So you continue to do that. You continue to have the rest part and continue to have the rest, and I will not touch your power. So that is how the feudal system continued in the colonial times. The feudal system was actually good for the British, it was advantageous for the British, because they could just use these people in order to control the rest of the population. So it is not like the Muslims collaborated. So that is a wrong idea that continues to be transmitted by actually the Hindu fundamentalists. They want to say that it was because of Muslims that India got divided, it was because of Muslims that the British could conquer. But let's remember that at the time when the British were trying to conquer India, most parts of India were ruled by Muslims. So India was part of the Islamic empire of the Middle Ages. So different Islamic empires were throughout the Middle Ages. India would be part of different Islamic empires, like Timurid Empire, the Umayyad one, like all of them. Okay? So when the British were in India trying to conquer India in the mid 18th century, it was the Mughals who were the rulers of most part of India. So the British conquered India from Muslims. So why would they collaborate, right? So that was not the reason for the collaboration. Now the divide and conquer would come about another century later, from the middle of the 19th century, and it actually originated from the side of the Hindus, from the rich Hindu people all over India. But especially, I am sorry to say, especially Bengal, like it's a very bad thing, but some of the biggest Hindu ideologues of the mid 19th century were from Bengal, and they tried to propagate this idea that India is not a nation. So the idea of nation state was coming from the British, and India was not a nation. It was just two different people who could never be together, and they're saying the Muslims and Hindus were two different people who could never be together, who could never live together. They were two people who were always contradicting each other. So that is why they wanted to have a different country for the Hindus. And this was picked up by Muslim fundamentalists who said that, well, if this is the situation, that we also want a country for us. So this sort of situation started to arise from the mid 19th century, especially from like 1857, after the Sepoy Mutiny, what they call the Sepoy Mutiny, what Marx called the first independence movement of India. So after 1857, the British started to fan the flames of this divide and conquer thing, of this division between Hindus and Muslims, because in the Sepoy Mutiny there was a very strong unity of Hindus and Muslims, and that almost overthrew the nascent British administration in India. So they knew that they have to break this unity in order to continue with their empire. That is why they tried to, they just took advantage of this thing, and they also be sending envoys to both the extremist Hindus and the extremist Muslims in order to make them hate each other more, or make their people to hate each other more through everything, through propaganda. Like they were the biggest propagandists of those times. The British were the biggest propagandists. look, like even worse propagandists than the Spanish or others. Like they were worse in terms of a lot of things. Like they were the worst colonizers in the history, or after the US probably.
But it is fair to say that the Hindu caste system did make India much more easier for the British to colonize and conserve an unjust system of colonialism married to this unjust system of the caste system, which if you're an atheist like like myself, you would say it's very closely associated with Hindu fundamentalism, right?
It is actually. So it was like that. Like it was, like you said, it was easy for the British to use the caste system in order to perpetuate their rule for 200 years. So they just knew that some people would like this, they would not rise, or they would be repressed by their own overlords. So the British would not have to spend money and energy in order to repress populations, etc. So that was one thing. And then even after independence, okay, the constitution at the beginning there was no law or no article in the constitution saying talking about land reform. So land reform was not in the constitution at the beginning. Okay, the Zamindari Abolition Act, Zamindar meaning the people who own the land. So the abolition of landowners so that you can give land to people was adopted in 1950, but it was not implemented in most part of India. It has still not been implemented in most part of India. So even though the law existed, it existed on paper. Land was made into a state subject, which is a good thing. But so it was mostly the onus of the states to implement land reform. Now, in most parts of the country, in most states, it would be the Indian National Congress that was the ruler in the government, the ruling party of the government. And what it did was, it did not implement land reform. It did not implement those laws. Instead, it just tried to somehow tell the landlords that give some land to the poor people. Okay, so they were not expropriating that land from them, which they had been holding unjustly for centuries. Instead, they say that just give some poor people land so that they can cultivate and etc. It would, after all, be good for India. So what those landholders did was they gave their worst lands to the poor people. Okay, they would keep the best lands because they knew that the landless farmers would still be coming to them, would still be working there, would still be in a sort of servitude, although they were not supposed to be like that, although the laws say that they were not supposed to be like that. But they knew that these people, where would the poor people go? So they would go to them, the rich, and they would be tilling their lands and no problem. So they would be giving some poor people some of their worst lands, most unproductive lands. So that was the land reform that was happening initially. And a country dependent on agroeconomy, like a big part of your GDP is coming from agroeconomy, but then you are not giving most people land. Why would they be producing more? Many of them would leave agriculture because they are not earning anything. They would try to go into industries because you are also industrializing the countries. So the their land and become laborers and go into industries. They can earn more there. That happened. So that was going on happening until neoliberalism. Neoliberalism accelerated that process.
All right. Well, before we get into that, then what's your assessment of Mohandas K. Gandhi or Mahatma Gandhi, and what do you think of Arundhati Roy's critical assessments of him? And then I'm also going to, well, actually, yeah, first answer that briefly if it's even possible, and then I'll ask you about the Gandhis, Nehru, Indira, and Rajiv, and the Indian National Congress. So.
Called the father of India, I have the problem with that, because what he has managed to do was unite disparate populations into a single India. So the cohesion of India actually happened after Gandhi had returned to India and started all these ideas of separating from the British rule. Now, initially, he was not talking about complete freedom or complete independence. He actually wanted a dominion status for India.
Okay.
Century after he had returned to India, he had been talking about the dominion status, British rule. So there would be a sort of autonomous government under the British rule. Well, you have Puerto Rico in the US to to just know what it is. Anyway, so he was wanting something like that. So that was how he started when he had started his first satyagrahas, that is the non-violence movements, and then the non-violent non-cooperation movement just around the same time as the First World War. Indians actually supported that cause because that cause was talking about freedom, and there were more people. Actually, there were other leaders who were more radical and talking about complete freedom or at least more autonomy than a dominion rule. So people had participated in that in huge numbers. So that was like in the 20th century, that was the biggest national liberation movement in the world, because we had big population always. Anyway, so that was the biggest national liberation movement, and like Gandhi's leadership was very important in that. And also, like after he stopped the non-cooperation movement because it has become violent, it was non-violent, and it wouldn't, because the British had promised that if they win the First World War, if they won in the First World War, if they were on the winning side, they would have given their freedom. And by the time they were like in 1920, they were saying, no, we won't give you freedom. So that, of course, like, why would anyone believe colonizers, right? So in the 1920s, once we in their freedom, of course, people would explode that they had been trying to negotiate with the British for so long. They had participated in the war. Like Indians had signed up for the war, went into the trenches, fought for the British so that they would win, because they had promised that they would give freedom. And then they're saying no, they're not keeping their promise. So of course people become violent. They owed, like anyone owed. Nobody likes broken promises. And so at this point, Gandhiji stopped that movement because it had become violent, and he did not want it to become violent. And actually, it was important in many ways because it gave rise to like armed movements in different parts of India. And it was also from there that in 1926, the All India Trade Union Congress was formed. Like it was the first platform for workers in India, the first trade union. And then 10 years later, the All India Kisan Sabha, which still exists, was formed. Like it was the farmers organization. So these things would not have come out had the non-violent non-cooperation movement not taken place. There were other factors, but that was important. And I'd also like to point out here that in 1921, just after the formation of the Communist Party of India, and after they had returned from wherever they had gone, like they were mostly in Soviet Union, especially in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, etc. So after they had returned to India, they became part of the Indian National Congress because the Communist Party of India was banned from the very beginning by the British. Okay? So they joined the Indian National Congress, and it made like push it towards more towards the left. So in the 1921 national meeting of the Indian National Congress, the communists raised the slogan of complete independence from British rule. So that was the time that a lot of people would say that the Congress raised the call of the complete independence, but it was the communists inside the Congress that were raising it.
Interesting.
All these would not have come out if the Congress did not exist, and if Gandhiji had not been able to unite a lot of people, like millions of people in India. So that was important. Like his leadership from that onwards was important. But what his problems were, he also did not want to dismantle the caste system. He said that the caste system was good, and this is where Arundhati Roy would come in and criticize him correctly. It should be. Okay, so he said that he wanted to end untouchability, that nobody should be untouchable.
Oh, wait. Saheli, can you repeat that again? Because it cut off. Because it was a very important point you made. So repeat that again about Gandhi and his views on caste.
Okay, so he did not want to end the caste system. He said the caste system was good. He said that the caste system can be reformed. Okay, so the fact that it is a system that cannot be reformed, he did not think so. He thought that the caste system can be reformed. So he wanted to dismantle untouchability. He said that there should be no one who should be untouchable, like everybody is God. Nobody should be untouchable. Everybody should be equal in that respect. But he did not want to end the caste system. He said that the caste system was something inherent to Hinduism, and that separates or distinguishes Hinduism from Islam or from Christianity and from many other religions that do not have a caste system. Now, how that is good for Hinduism, nobody could see, but he had that idea. So he also did not support the idea of intermingling and intermarriage among different religions. Okay. So he had many.
Okay, wow, that's okay. That's news to me. Okay, interesting.
So he had this about everybody. He had repressive views about other religions. He had repressive views about lower castes. But he would want India to be like independent with its caste system, because he and many other people actually thought that it was the British who were trying to destroy Hindu religion by making people liberal, so that they were fighting against the caste system. Because yes, there were many reformists, liberal reformists throughout, and they had tried to the ills of Hinduism. So there were many who wanted to to end caste system. That is why he and many others were thinking that the essence of India as they knew it would be lost. So that was a very big problematic part on Gandhi's part. And then there is another thing. He says that violence is always bad, and he considered the armed movements to be violent, like the armed freedom movements, which were, they weren't fighting Indians, they were fighting the British. So he still considered them bad, and he would not support them. In case of Bhagat Singh, when Bhagat Singh was sentenced to death, there were people within the Congress who also wanted, like Gandhiji, to write to the British in order to impute his sentence, to commute his sentence to maybe life imprisonment or something, because like there are many people who had been in life imprisonment, but after independence they were released, right? So they thought that if you are in prison, you could still be released sometime, you would not die. He did not write to the British in order to asking them to commute his sentence. In all probability, they would not have listened to him, but he did not even try. And this happened all the time. Like, he did not support the revolt by the Royal Indian Navy in 1946. Okay, so that was one of the last freedom movements in the country, and he did not support it, saying that they were being violent, they were using weapons, but they were using the weapons on the British.
So his non-violent fundamentalism was very, very problematic at times.
In many ways, because it actually meant that India would get independence through negotiation and not through revolution.
Okay. And before we ask about the legacies of of the Gandhis, which actually are not Gandhis, but are part of the Nehru dynasty, I'm going to butcher this guy's name, but he was critical of Gandhi and very much wanted he wanted the eradication of the caste system. Arundhati Roy props him up, and that is B.R. Ambedkar. Ambedkar, am I saying that correctly?
Yes, he is. Yeah, he is B.R. Ambedkar, and yes, he was the father of the Indian Constitution. We call him. He was the president of the Constituent Assembly that redacted the. The Constituent Assembly was not elected by the people. Okay, So the British wanted all the political recognized to send their representatives to the British. They would sit down with the British and reject the constitution for India. So that was the Constituent Assembly. Now Ambedkar was the president of that assembly, and yes, he was from a lower caste, so he, like in school, had suffered a lot from higher caste teachers who would not let him sit with the other students, who would not let him drink water from the same fountain that the other students would be using. He to attend class from outside the door like that. So he himself in the caste system. It was not like he was a liberal reformer from outside. He was an insider, and he also. You have to be always non-violent.
Okay, sorry. So there was a delay in that. So basically, yeah, he was the one who was very much a leader of the anti-caste system, and he would often clash with Gandhi, including the use of non-violence, right?
Yes, including on the use of non-violence, but mostly on the caste system, because Gandhi supported it, Gandhi wanted to keep it, whereas Ambedkar did not. Also, he talked about reparations for the lower castes. Okay, if we're using today's language, he talked about reparations for the lower caste. So he wanted a system in which these people, like the people who had been excluded from everything, so they would not only have token representation, but they should also be given a priority when it came to all sorts of reform to education and to things. So he wanted to make this sort of system in which there would be representation as well as there would be real reforms in favor of the peoples who had been excluded for centuries. So that was one thing, that if you had to do that, you would have to do away with the caste system, right? You'd have to do away with untouchability. You'd have to have very strong laws in order to do away with them, and then you would have to implement those too, because just having good laws does not help anyone. You have to implement them. So he and Gandhi clashed in these regards. So of course, Congress was always a broad party. It was never a regimented one. So it had different factions. So Gandhi was in one faction, the largest, and then there was Ambedkar, that faction, that was a social reformist part. And then there was also the part of the Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, who was for taking over India from the British colonial rule through an armed revolution and all those things. So they fought the British with weapons. They lost, of course, because all their firepower and everything. And then also
actually, repeat that again.
Which part?
The part about the armed revolution, and then from there.
Okay, so I said that there was a third part, which was Netaji Subhash, and he was also leader of the Congress. He formed the Forward Bloc a lot later. So he was the most leftist faction of the Congress, and he was the person who led the largest armed revolution against the British. I said that they lost because who would win with all the firepower of the British, and also the fact that Gandhiji was not supporting him. He did not, actually. I mean, they also clashed. At the time when there was a huge problem. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, he was still not Netaji, but Subhash Chandra Bose would become the president of Congress. So they would have these elections every year, like the internal elections all parties have. And when there is this probability that he would become the president, Gandhiji sent one of his own candidates. Okay, so there was an election, and Bose still won that. So he won the election, and then Gandhiji did everything.
They well, one moment.
Bose still won.
Oh, Stupid internet connection. So you're saying that so the armed people had their candidates, but they won in a tie with one of Gandhi's candidates?
No, they did not. They did not win a tie. They won. Like it was an election and they won. Without a tie, they won overwhelmingly. Okay, they had won overwhelmingly, and then Subhash Chandra Bose became the president of Congress. But then Gandhiji did everything to remove him from the party. He removed him, and Netaji formed his different party, the Forward Bloc, Indian Forward Bloc, which also still exists. It is a leftist party. So that one, like, that separated from the Congress, and that actually harmed. I would say that harmed the Indian liberation movement finally, because when the Congress was negotiating with the British, Subhash Chandra Bose was no longer there. His death is still a mystery. Nobody knows what happened to him. But still, we can consider that he died. And like that part, the most revolutionary part of Congress, most of it was in prison. So he was sent by the British. They were sent by the British. They were like sent to military courts and then sent to their prison in the midst of the Bay of Bengal. So they were in a prison that was out in the sea. They could not participate in the final process of Indian independence. So that had harmed the country in many ways, I would say.
And then that's a perfect segue to this question, which is, what's your assessment of the legacy, both the good and the bad, of Nehru, his daughter Indira Gandhi, and subsequently her son Rajiv Gandhi, and how do you assess the Indian National Congress, and if the Indian National Congress is comparable to like the Democrats or the Labour Party of England, New Zealand, and Australia, and many other social democratic or pseudo-left parties like the New Democratic Party or the ANC of South Africa, isn't it long overdue that the Indian working class and the left stopped supporting the INC? And what party would you advocate? Because you mentioned the Communist Party of India, and what about the the Trotskyist Socialist Equality Party, which publishes the World Socialist website? I believe they have a branch in India. I believe they have a branch in India.
There are many kinds. Like there are many kinds of left in India, just like there are many kind of rights too. Like of course there would be. Just 1 minute, let me turn on the charging, because the charge is going, so you won't be able to see me.
Yes, no problem.
Okay.
And then while Saheli's doing that, just want to remind people to please share widely 1+1. Otherwise, otherwise the show's never going to advance. And that September 21st, I'm moderating a debate with World Beyond War. It's going to be between David Swanson and Arnold August on if wars are ever justifiable.
I understand. I mean, I really like that. Saying anything on it for wars of national liberation is very important.
Wait, say it again, Saheli. Sorry.
National liberation. I said that wars of national liberation are very of national liberation. We would in the country today in order to make anything. Okay. So wars of national liberation are very important.
Exactly. Wars of national liberation, and also wars of resistance against aggressive imperialists.
Of course. So that is also in a way in order to save or in order to protect your sovereignty and liberation, right? So yes, you can do, like, you can be in war to liberate your country as well as to protect that liberation. You can, like, nobody goes into war. Like countries like ours would not go into war with the imperialists because they want it. Like they would have, unless they're forced, they would not. Like no country would. Because we don't have, what do we have? We don't have the sort of weapons that the US has. We don't have the sort of money that they have. Not print money and anyway, but that's a different thing, and you would be moderating a debate on it within 3 weeks. So we'll be.
Yes, I'm looking forward. Looking forward to you joining the audience, and I'll make sure to post the link so that people can register for that on Zoom. So yes, so what's your assessment?
Coming to the Gandhis.
Yes, what's your assessment of Nehru, Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, and the Indian National Congress in general, both the good and the bads? Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
okay,
I think
so
we got
Nehru.
you.
Oh, yeah, okay. So Nehru was the first Prime Minister of India. Of course, as the first Prime Minister, he did a lot of important things that would be nationalizing the natural resources. Okay, so in the Constitution guarantees that the natural resources would remain in the hands of the people. They would belong to the people of India. It does not happen, but that is actually what the law says. So putting that into law is very important. And after that, of course, that was the good side. He will be developing great relations with the Soviet Union in order to start all these things like the industrialization of the country, the development of agriculture, because the British had destroyed that too. So in order to do all these things, he had to have good relations with the USSR because nobody else, like the West, would not be giving money to India. Right? Britain, they made the Commonwealth, but the Commonwealth is not to distribute wealth among the common people. It is to steal wealth. Okay, so the Commonwealth is still a system of colonial domination.
Exactly.
It's not like the British were helping. It's not like the British were helping India. And India would still need to. It needed credit. It needed technology. It needed a lot of things. Who would give them? So developing that relation with USSR was very important. Then Nehru did this, developed the foreign policy of India that is still mostly followed, and it was dependent on 5 principles. The most important of it was look east. So instead of looking towards the west, we will be looking east and developing relations with the countries that are considered not west. Okay, so India did that. So it started developing, like under Nehru, we had this in 1955, we had the Bandung Conference. From there would originate the non-aligned movement. India was the pioneer of the non-aligned movement. And so that was also a very important thing that India did in order to protect peace in the world, so that there is no nuclear confrontation or anything, because by that time, both US and USSR had nuclear weapons. So just to ensure
and sadly, India and Pakistan, with their ongoing Cold War, also has nuclear weapons, which is a pity.
Well, actually, I mean, as long as the US has the nuclear weapons, I do not support having nuclear weapons, but as long as the US has, you have to have them as deterrent. So as long as the US does not dismantle its system, nobody else should. Or there would be what happened to Gaddafi. Okay? Don't give up your weapons unless the US does.
Yeah. Exactly.
Anyway, now, that India had to, like India was a promoter of peace in the global level for a long time. So also Nehru made sure to put of war. So India would never fight other countries under the banner of US to go and fight in Iraq, for example, or Syria. India would not do that. India almost did. Okay. Question. So these are the important things that India still has to follow. So those, I would say that those were the good legacies of Nehru that are still keeping us safe from many things. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, however, like I said, inside India, Nehru was not doing land reform. Nehru was not doing equitable distribution of wealth. And he also, what he was doing was repressing any opposition voice. The first thing that he did was he had promised this Kashmir question should also be examined in this light. Why is that situation still there? It should not be like this, right? So when India, this is also quite interesting that when India was gaining independence from the British rule, the British did something. It said that since they were also partitioning India, they said that the princely states, that is the states that were still ruled by the kings or princes, those princely states will decide on their own whether to join India or to join Pakistan. Now, what that meant was that there were princely states within what was becoming India. There were princely states also within what was becoming Pakistan. So if some state, princely state, wanted to join Pakistan but was within the landmass of India, then you will have an enclave of Pakistan within India. Similar thing could have happened in Pakistan. So what both countries did was that they did not allow those princely states to hold any sort of princely states would not have held referendums. They would just have joined one or the another. So they did not allow that to take place. They sent the Indian army, Nehru sent the Indian army into those princely states and acquired those states. Okay, so in my opinion, that's good. However, what happened with Kashmir is that although it was still a princely state, what happened was that his prime minister at that time, he was more powerful than the king, and he said that Kashmir would join India, but it had to be allowed a referendum in order to decide it. And Nehru had promised the referendum, but after Kashmir had joined India, that referendum was never held. Okay, so that referendum was never allowed. So that was again breaking a promise that you had promised you had to do it. It did not. It has still not happened. However, what Nehru did was he put a clause in the constitution giving it a particular different sort of autonomy and giving it more autonomy than the states. That was a sort of broken promise that he should not have done, and it is because of this that place is today that place is the most militarized region in the world, even more militarized than occupied Palestine. Okay, so that is a bad legacy from his time.
And of course, if you don't, and of course, the running thing is, if you don't get rid of the unjust caste system, if you don't confront it head on, you're always going to have inequality, right?
Yes, of course. So it's not like he did not say that away with inequality, and not one person, a single person cannot do it. But he should have started the land reform that he did not. And there is a reason why, the people who were the leaders of Congress, most of them were big landholders. So why would he start a war with the leaders of his own party? It would destabilize them, right? So he did not do that. Now, in case of Indira Gandhi, initially she was left of her father, and she was the person who nationalized the banks, because she knew that one who owns the wealth owns the power. So if bankers had wealth in their hands, they could destabilize the government, they could conspire with foreign powers and everything. And the question of foreign powers is very important, because when the British divided India, partitioned India into Pakistan and India, and Bangladesh came later, when they divided the country, they wanted to make South Asia a place which they could always rule. They did it with that idea. So initially, at the time, US was becoming more powerful than the British, because the British was losing. The Britain was losing its empire. So most of its colonies it was losing. So US was more powerful, and it was the US that Pakistan, the country, into their base. There are US bases in Pakistan, and it's not today. It existed from a long time ago. Right? that question of foreign power is important because they did not like India. Pakistan was the original junior partner of the US in Asia.
Yeah.
So India is now trying to become a junior partner, but it should not. Just look at Pakistan and should not. Anyway, so at that time there was this tension with India, the West and India.
So Indira, like Nehru, when it comes to foreign policy, is still very much on paper, non-aligned, and in practice tries to have good relations with the U.S., good relations with the USSR, but never ever closely aligns itself with Anglo-American imperialism.
Yes, she was an anti-imperialist in foreign policy, true. What she was doing in India was that she was more repressive than her father. So, and this thing actually would come about, she was someone who got, who fell in love with power. Okay, it's a very sad thing, but it happened. And what happened was that she could not, she did not like the idea of any state of India being governed by a party that was not the Indian National Congress. So she tried to, she dissolved governments of many states by force. Okay, so there is an article in the Constitution of India which does give to the central government, but not in full power, a sort of negotiated power, let's say, to the central government to dissolve state governments if it become a very unruly state, if there was a lot of violence there. So, or if the government itself fell because, if it was a coalition government or something and one party was going out of that coalition, then it becomes a minority and it can no longer govern, right? So that is divisions within these coalitions that were not Congress in the states which were being governed by those parties, so that she could just dissolve this, overthrow the government, let's say. Twice to Bengal, to West Bengal, in 19 government.
Okay, so
in 1967.
So there was a dispute between local governments, states, and there's a part of the Constitution where, say, hypothetically, if a if a state dominated by Sikhs wanted to secede, she could sort of call in a state of emergency.
No. State has the right to secede. India is not that sort of federal like in the US.
Okay.
We're
having so many instant connection problems today. That's okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Saheli.
Yeah, Indian system. India is, it's a Constitution says that India is quasi-federal with a strong center, which means that states have a lot of rights, but not the right to secede. So this is not a question that if a state dissolves into violence, government suppress the state government and take over the power for a time being, not forever. It has to again hold elections and everything. It cannot continue to rule a state. However, what that whenever there was a state which was ruled by a party or a group of that was not the Indian National Congress, to overthrow that government and install a government of Congress.
Okay.
So in 1967, India had a West Bengal had a central-left government, and it tried to industrialize Bengal. It tried to implement land reform. It was the first state that tried to implement land reform. West Bengal, I think, was the third state that tried to implement it. That tried to do these things in 1967. Indira Gandhi overthrew the government in 1969. She held an election after that. The left again won in 1969. So she overthrew that government in 1971 again. And then the election that was held in 1972 was stolen. That is, the Congress did not win it. Okay, it was the second largest party in the state. Nobody had won a majority of seats, but in the case when nobody wins a majority, they can form coalition with other parties. Like the largest party can form coalition with others in order to get a majority. You have to give time for that. She didn't do that. She did not let the largest party, which was the Communist Party of India, she did not let that party to form government in West Bengal. Instead, she installed the leader of Congress in Bengal to become the chief minister of Bengal. That unleashed unprecedented violence in Bengal. And then in 1975, when there was a general election in India, which it is through this election that the government of the country is elected. In that election, Indira Gandhi had probably lost from her seat in Uttar Pradesh. So she forced the election commission to declare her the winner. And there was a case in the Allahabad High Court of Uttar Pradesh, and that High Court suspended her from that post, said that there should be a re-election in that seat. She can of course participate in it, but there should be a re-election. So what she did was, on the midnight of 25th of June 1975, she ushered in the emergency in India, dissolved the government, all of it, her own government. She dissolved her own government and started what is called the president's rule, but it is actually the president of India is only the titular head of India. The president does not have power. It's the prime minister who is the most powerful person. So it's actually the prime minister's rule by proxy. So she concentrated all power in her hands, suspended the constitution. Now it's in a way it's good, because after a lot of violence and a lot of repression in 1977, she had to call elections again of the country, general election in India, and Congress lost for the first time. So in 1977, the Indian National Congress lost. It was a coalition that came in, of course, that fell. But anyway, that was the time when the Congress had lost, and also that government which had come into power, it amended that particular article of the Constitution, it's Article 357, and she amended both 356 and 357 so that you cannot as easily dissolve state governments, and you cannot as easily implement emergency as you could before that. So that was the legacy from her time. She actually was doing a lot of good things, but this emergency and this love for power tarnishes her legacy. But otherwise, she could have been the greatest leader of the country. We cannot say that for her. Okay. And then, of course, even after coming later to power, there was all this trouble. There was this separatist movement in Punjab, Khalistan, and she tried to repress it brutally. And then she would be assassinated herself. And then after that, there was an election, and her son won the sympathy vote, okay, and become the prime minister. So in a way,
that's kind of amazing, though, that given her repression, given the fact that she didn't address the very things her dad did not address, that when she was murdered by her two bodyguards who did not like her very severe repression of the Sikhs, whether one says, well, she kind of had a right to oppress them since they were trying to form a breakaway country, but putting that issue aside, that's amazing, though, that given all that, her son won the election based on a sympathy vote.
Yes, actually, in one way, it was a sympathy vote, and it was also another, because the coalition government that 1977, after Indira Gandhi lost, Congress lost for the first time, that coalition government could not last, could not complete 5 years. It could not complete its term because of internal infighting. So people were already thinking that probably it's only the Congress that can unite the country and can govern.
Okay.
These or coalitions might not be able to govern because everybody had too much ambition. Okay? So if everybody wants to become prime minister, then a coalition
needs to be formed.
Actually, yes, when a coalition has to be formed, it has to be cohesive, it has to be articulated in a way war can complete its term and have something to show for it. That yes, we have been here for 5 years, we did all these good things. It had not done.
Okay, and then and then when it comes to Rajiv Gandhi, and this will be the final topic we'll talk about since we're having so much internet connection problems today. So how do you okay? So the final two questions is how do you assess her son's legacy, Rajiv Gandhi, and given the Indian National Congress has been, at best, it's been, sort of a mixed bag. I believe he even once told me that it never really was a center-left party. It was just sort of this broad church party with different factions. Why hasn't, an alternative left party like the Communist Party of India or the Trotskyist Socialist Equality Group that publishes the World Socialist website, why haven't they sort of been able to steal the Indian National Congress's thunder and be a proper opposition to the BJP, the Hindu fundamentalist party led by Modi, who did pogroms against Indian Muslims?
Okay, so that would be a lot of things to address. Now, in case of Rajiv Gandhi, he too was assassinated, so he did not have much time to address a lot of things. And so, nobody would say that he had a lot of legacy to leave. However, I would say that it was from Rajiv Gandhi's time that we could feel that India would go towards a way that would not be good for India, like it would be going towards neoliberalism. Of course, India formally went into neoliberalism in 1991 after the fall of the USSR. But let's remember 1986. The USSR's downfall had started. So it was at that time that Rajiv Gandhi had come. So the relation with the USSR was deteriorating because they were the ones who were deteriorating it, not India. So that already happened, that already had started. And then in 1987, you had this the beginnings of the World Trade Organization through the new GATT, the new General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs that was going on in Uruguay, and India had initially not supported it. India only supported it in 1995 when it entered the World Trade Organization. Anyway, so in a way, Rajiv Gandhi was trying to maintain the foreign policy that his grandfather and his mother had done. However, inside India, it was already becoming clear India could no longer have the credit lines that it could access from the Soviet Union, and there was a lot of turmoil going on in the world, which actually impacted the country. And then the Green Revolution, the only thing that he was doing good was that he was supporting what is called the Green Revolution or the agricultural revolution in India, which was industrializing agriculture. But this industrialization, of course, it finally brought about a lot of problems. But at that time, there was just a boom in agriculture. Okay, and by agriculture, I mean production of food. So India was producing. India actually became a food sovereign country in time of Rajiv Gandhi. So that was a good legacy from his time. It did not last long, because after neoliberalism, it again started going downhill. But India achieved food sovereignty in the late 80s, in the time of Rajiv Gandhi. And then, of course, in 1991, he would be assassinated in May 1991 by the Tamils, because they felt that India was not supporting the Tamils in Sri Lanka, who were facing a genocidal pogrom. So,
yeah.
Of course, I mean, India could not do anything the foreign policy of India also dictates that India could not go into other countries and interfere in internal matters. So Tamils in Sri Lanka considered that it was not an internal matter, it was becoming an international matter, and India should have said something, but Rajiv Gandhi would not. So that would, I mean, I do not support assassination, so yes, he should not have been assassinated, but he was. And then Narasimha Rao would become the first non-Gandhi, would become the prime minister, and it was under his time that neoliberalism would be started in India in 1991. And with these, like with the start of neoliberalism, India would start to lose its earlier legacies that was becoming from the Gandhis, the good legacies. The bad ones still remained, the good ones started to be lost because like finance capital always targets those things. So it targets big national agriculture, it targets national industries, it targets education, it targets social welfare, health, everything. So since it targeted those, India would start losing those things. Now, if we would come to like present, because we were also talking of the Communist Party and the Socialists, well, actually, there are, like I said, there are many different kinds of leaders.
And after, I'm just looking at the list of presidents of not presidents, prime ministers of India, and after Rajiv Gandhi, you had I'm going to butcher his name, but you had Mr. Singh of the Janata Dal Party or the National Front Party. Then you had Chandra Shekhar of the I'm also gonna okay, whatever. I'm gonna butcher all these people's names. Who was part of the SJ party, the Samawada Janata party. Then you had Mr. Rao of the Indian National Congress. Then you had for the first time the BJP in 1996. And then you had the Janata Dal Party led by Mr. H.D. Gauda and Inter Kumar Gujral, I believe, and then you had the BJP again.
There is I would come to it that Janata Party and Bharatiya Janata Party are different. So no, BJP came for the first time in 1998. In 1996, when you had I.K. Gujral and H.D. Devegowda, it was the Janata Party. So it was the People's Party, not the People's Party of India. Those are different things. So that was also a coalition government, and they also could not keep government for long. And in 1998, you have BJP because of all the infighting within these parties. So, like in 1991, you would start neoliberalism. Then in 1996, when you had the Janata Party government, like you had the general election in 1996 and the Janata Party government, it also had some left representation in it. Okay, and they actually tried to resist the neoliberal doctrine, and it was because of this that at that time those who wanted to privatize agriculture in India could not do it. Okay, so there were some laws that prevented that, and those laws were drafted at that time in order to protect farmers' rights. And they also had changed the Land Reform Act and everything in order to accelerate land reforms in most parts of the country, so that even if you had neoliberal pressure, people would be still owning land and people could still like earn something from it. So those were the laws that they could put into the constitution, but that did not help much, because then in 1998 you have the BJP, which is like the most right-wing thing that India has ever seen. So Congress was like a centrist party all the time. It had left factions, it had very right-wing factions, but it was mostly like most of its policies were centered. In 1998, when you have BJP, people were fed up with Congress and people were fed up with all the coalition governments that could not complete their terms. So BJP would come back in 1998, promising to give India a stable political structure. They lost
And we also have to, and we also have to say that, you know, when you have a country like India, which has never eradicated its caste system, and you know, and still has all these colonial hangovers of you know, of British colonialism, British capitalism, something like, something like neoliberalism, which I don't like to call it neoliberalism because liberalism does have some positive connotations, but a system like neoliberalism, Reaganomics, Thatcherism, monetarism, corporatism, whatever you want to call it, that's a disaster for a country like India or for any African country, because it makes what's already very weak, and it makes already the grievances that needs to be addressed. And it's a series of setbacks for a country like India or a continent like Africa, or a region like Latin America.
Yes, it's back for like most people. Like it's a setback for workers' rights. It's a setback. Like there would be token representation for women, but it would be a setback for women's rights because, like, if you do not have financial independence, you have no independence. Let's remember this. Okay, so that those are actually like attacks on everybody's rights and everybody's lives. And in case of India, also it becomes an attack for the attack falls the greatest on the most vulnerable people, and most of the country is most vulnerable. Anyway, so when BJP would come to power, it could not hold government for more than 13 days initially. However, it again won the election in 1999. We had too many elections at that time because like nobody could hold government for long. Okay, so it managed to win the 1999 election, and Vajpayee would become the prime minister and would accelerate neoliberalism with
who is this? Who is this again?
Atal Bihari Vajpayee. You would find his name also, Vajpayee. In 1999, you will find him the prime minister, and like when he would say that he's modernizing India. He tried to present himself as the first modern man or something like that for India. And in the name of modernization, he would just accelerate the selling off of the industries and everything. He would just go on privatizing. Like it was a spree of privatization. They even made a ministry to sell off national industries. So that is the sort of thing. There is a ministry to sell off industries. Just imagine. Okay, and it said that it is just liberalizing the country and liberalizing the economy. And also India, like at the time, India would try to follow the script that is written in Washington for dismantling the Indian agriculture, because the Indian agriculture is a very big thing. A lot of India is a big player in the world agricultural market. India sells a lot of food to many countries. So they wanted to, like the US especially, because US is the largest seller of agricultural goods in the world market, except seafood. So US wanted to destroy this. Of course, it does not want any competitor anywhere. So it wanted to destroy the Indian agriculture. It still does. And Vajpayee was saying things like, we have to look beyond rice and wheat. We have to produce things that earn money. And he was meaning that you have to produce sunflower to make sunflower oil and sell it to Europe. You have to produce cotton too much and sell it to Europe. You have to produce what is called cash crops, flowers, etc., that you could dry them and sell them to Europe to make money. But that's not food. Like you cannot eat flowers. You cannot, like I know fruits are a good thing, but you cannot just live on them, right? You need your staple carbohydrates in your diet. Otherwise, like how would people live? You have to go on producing rice, wheat, millets, etc. So in his time, he also, like in 2003, I think, he even put forward the idea of dismantling the Food Corporation of India, which actually has the responsibility to ensure that everybody in India gets the minimum caloric requirement. Right? So, of course, it does not ensure it, but it has that responsibility. He wanted to dismantle that FCI, the food corporation. He wanted to dismantle the way Indian agroeconomy existed. And like India went into such a recession in his time, especially from 2002. Like there was no recession in the world. Like of course, like most places have recessions, but it is not because of the international trade system like in 2008. Not at all. In 2002, India went into such deep recession that in 2004, Vajpayee lost the election. And okay, so he had this. I remember I was a child, but I remember that there was all these advertisements, like government advertisements in the state media. Like India is shining. So he had this advertisement called Shining India, that this is how India would go into the new millennia, and India was in recession.
India, yeah, I remember that.
And India was in recession, so he lost. Like BJP lost in the election in 2004, and that was the first time, like after a long time, that was the first time when the Congress would return. But it could not return alone. It also did not have enough, like the majority, to form government. So it had to go into coalition with the left. And the first United Progressive Alliance, or the UPA-1, was formed in 2004. And it was in times of this United Progressive Alliance, especially because of the left pressure, because the left was in government, it had 66 members of parliament. So 66 members of parliament is a big thing. It has a lot of pressure. Without that support, Congress would not have government, so it had to listen to the left. So at that time, it would have again there would be some gaining back of some of the rights that had been rolled back over the last decade. So there would be the formation of this scheme to, like, it was the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. We had a similar scheme for the urban regions also, that would ensure that every worker in rural areas or in urban areas would have earnings for at least 100 days a year, and that would be ensured by the central government. Then there was this, again, the literacy campaign was relaunched, which had been dismantled after neoliberalism was ushered in. And then there was pressure to invest in health, and at the same time there was pressure to start being a bigger power again in the non-aligned movement. So let's remember that it was at this time, like it was the end, it was in 2009 that BRICS would be formed, but BRICS did not just come out in 2009. It started originating, just like the idea started originating in 2004-5. It started originating in Latin America actually.
But that was under the leadership of Manmohan Singh of the Indian National Congress, wasn't that?
Yes, it's Manmohan Singh. Manmohan Singh was the prime minister, but remember, I said that it was the United Progressive Alliance government. It was a coalition government in which the left had a big pressure. It had 66 members of parliament. So without without them, Congress could not be in government. So it was not a Congress government, it was an United Progressive Alliance government, and it was the first coalition government that completed its term. Okay, so like during the 90s, India was aligning with the West, India was aligning with the US in foreign policy. In 2003, when Bush invaded Iraq, India, like Vajpayee, had prepared the Indian army to go under the US to fight in Iraq. So I was saying that India almost went, but there was a lot of pressure in the streets, and also the administrative officers, they said that they would not work, they would leave their posts, they would start a strike if India did that, because it could not, like you said, that our constitution does not allow us to become this sort of military alliance. So finally he had to stand down, so that was a loss also there. So
Singh had to step down at some point.
Singh had to, like, even if he did not like it, he had to start to move away from the West and move towards the East and towards the look-east policy of Nehru. So India, despite its bad relation with China, it got into BRICS, especially because of Russia, because India always had maintained good relations with Russia even after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The bad part was the time of Yeltsin, but then from the Medvedev and then during Putin, India had very good relation, still has very good relation with Russia. So it was it was especially because of Russia and Brazil, because India also had very good relation with Brazil, with South Africa. So because of these people, India got into BRICS. Like BRICS was formed because the left was in government. Otherwise, India would not have gone into a group that was trying to form a separate system within the World Trade System. So these were the legacies from the first UPA 1 government. Now, in 2009, the UPA 1 government, like when it ended, the left left the alliance, and now we know that, like not just now, we knew from 2011 because of WikiLeaks that the US had a big role in it. So the US
had a big role in
destroying that coalition.
Okay, interesting.
So yes, the cables that were leaked by WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks actually released around 40,000 cables related to US and India. So that was a big. I'm working on an article on it. I hope to finish it by October, and then I will send it to you. But anyway.
Perfect.
So that the US had a big role in destroying that coalition. That the US pressured Singh and like the heads of that government to get into a nuclear alliance with the US, not weapons alliance. India is not into a nuclear weapons alliance with the US, but in the nuclear power thing. But what it did was, India is not a signatory in the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. India isn't. And India holds this idea, which I also do, is that as long as US has nuclear weapons, India also has the right to hold nuclear weapons. After the US gets rid of them, everybody else can. So, however, what it did was that nuclear power deal was that the US would be selling India the nuclear plant fuel, which India mostly gets from Russia, because like most of India's nuclear power plants were built in conjunction with Russia, with Soviet Union, and still gets all the parts and stuff from Russia. Anyway, and in return, India would open all of its nuclear facilities to IAEA and to the US. Now, this was an attack on sovereignty. It was considered an attack on sovereignty, and the left left that coalition on this ground, and also because of the fact that the Congress was again moving closer to the US and was not listening to anyone. So the UPA 2 government, the second time, and from 2009 to 2014, the Congress was again in power with Manmohan Singh again as the Prime Minister. But in that government, the left wasn't there. So again, you had all the rolling back of rights, and it also fell into such scams, such financial instability. And of course, starting from 2008, you had the worldwide depression, which still continues. So in 2019, BJP would make a big comeback. Sorry, in 2014, in 19 again, but in 2014 it made a big comeback with Modi in power. Now Modi, who was already being investigated because of his role in the anti-Muslim pogrom in Gujarat, he would become the Prime Minister, and then all those cases would be dropped because Modi and his government would pressure the judiciary to stop all those cases, and then it would slowly take over all these judicial bodies and everything else. So now it's again like now it's a very dystopian situation. We are in fascism.
And I think in in closing, is it safe to say, in closing this conversation, that the only way India will get out of the grotesque inequality, grotesque bad infrastructure, and the only way it'll rid itself of the Hindu fundamentalism that it's gripped by with Modi, you really need not just a political, well, look, you need a people power movement with a very good political party that really gets into the heart of the problem, which is the caste system and capitalism. Because I think for me, it's only natural that if a country does not eradicate the caste system and do some of the things that that you were saying that the Indian National Congress should have done, that it's only natural that you're going to get a party like the BGP and a movement like that, which is Hindu fundamentalism, in which you have the worst of both worlds, which is the caste system and capitalism. Neoliberalism, if people really want to be all picky about it.
Actually, yes, you would need a broad popular movement. Like, you cannot be very nitpicky in this because, but let's see, I guess remember something, and like it's very important in case of India, because you have a caste system as well as and like that divide and conquer thing still exists. So Hindus and Muslims are supposed to be very different and always in fight with each other. Of course, they aren't. But what the BJP has been able to indoctrinate a large part of the Hindu population. I would not say everyone, I would not even say majority, but maybe 30% of the Hindu population. What it has been able to indoctrinate them is that the Hindus are in danger, they are being taken over by the Muslims. That's not true. Like, if you look at the population,
exactly.
If you look at the population, 83% of the population identifies as Hindus, only 13% as Muslims. So that's already a big disparity in population, and only that sort of minority can take over a majority if it is very rich. Muslims are the poorest in India. Okay, so like most of the rich people, the richest people, they are Hindus. Like very few Muslims are rich, and if they are rich, there is all these questions of capitalism coming in, and they are actually collaborators and no longer closer to their people. So like if you can indoctrinate a third of the population, that you are in danger from a minority population, which Hitler had been able to do in Germany towards the beginning of his rule. So that sort of thing has happened in India. So because of this, you can always invoke this fear at the time of elections. Like even if you have not done anything, like the present situation of India, the present economic situation, India is in recession again, although nobody is saying it, but it is. Like India has the 2-digit inflation on foodstuffs, okay? And it is not just new, and one cannot blame it on Ukraine because India is not an importer of food, India is an exporter of food. So you cannot blame it on anything, you can just blame it on your bad management. Okay. So like India has negative growth in agriculture, means it has no growth in agriculture, its industrial growth is stagnant. So in a situation like this, when you have a huge unemployment, it's said that almost 50% of the population aged 18 to 40 is unemployed, like half the working force is unemployed. In this sort of situation, nobody can remain in power unless they are very fascistic and authoritarian. So, and if you have, like, even fascist and authoritarian could not hold power unless they could divide and conquer, and that's exactly what BJP has been able to do with this rhetoric of Hindus in danger. Now, in order to break this thing, you cannot just say that, okay, this person is a bigot, he hates them, or he hates this person, or etc. So I would not be in a coalition with them. You cannot be that sort of nitpicky. You have to build a big enough platform in order to be able to confront that force. So you should like what, in fact, the left, the Congress, and other parties are trying to do, and I should say that the social movements are also trying to do this. And in India, social movements are not just simple feminism or anything. It's actually workers' movements and peasants' movements, especially the farmers' movement. What they're trying to do is trying to build this platform in order to be able to confront that, like BJP's power. So,
and lots of people are part of the Indian Communist Party when it comes to that kind of grassroots efforts.
if you consider politically, then of course one cannot say that India, the Communist Party of India, is a big political party. It is like I think the fifth or sixth largest party in India in terms of the number of cadres. But what is more important is that the grassroots movement, the farmers movement, the students movement, the workers movement. So these are the places from where it's like it was this place from where the United Progressive Alliance one government had come up. Like shining India could be confronted by workers and peasants. So Modi's Hindu India also has to be confronted by those same powers, and having a platform with all those forces, with all their differences, but with also with all their similarities. Like one has to like it that thing, that sort of feat needs to be repeated in order to just stop this juggernaut and stop this fascism.
Alrighty. And then quick final. The Socialist Equality Group that publishes the World Socialist website, are they very big in India? Or
nobody knows them, and there is a reason why actually, because actually they have. I must say they have a left like the Western worldview when it comes to countries like ours. So you cannot do that with any place. Like you cannot just have a view which is centered in the West, and then you are looking towards other countries. So you would have them criticizing this leftist leader for having said or done something 20 years ago. In that way, actually, you cannot reach people. You have to, like I said, you cannot be very nitpicky when it comes to forming a broad platform. You cannot just say that, okay, this person does not support this thing, so I would not be with them at all. You cannot just say anything like that. You cannot just say that, okay, in the West, the women's movement is like this. So in the East, or in India, in Pakistan, in Turkey, in China, it has to be like this. No, it cannot, like, you cannot just think that you can copy and paste the West everywhere. No, each country has its own idiosyncrasies and like its own social systems, for bad or for good, they do. So you have to work from there. You just cannot impose anything from outside. You have to, like, if you have to change, you have to change from within. So what I'm saying is that with a Western worldview, nobody would like them much. They would just consider them like some people who are just trying to be like the West, and nobody would like that. So we all have colonial mentality, but we do not like people like that.
Interesting. It's kind of like for many Black people, and I would imagine Indigenous people and Latinx people, it must be very condescending when you do have white Marxists, white socialists. They can be Trotskyists, or anyone from the West. I would imagine they probably find it very condescending when they say you guys need to follow this dogma of of a Trotsky, of a Lenin, when many of them that just does not speak to them when we have our own leaders, we have our own heroes and sheroes, which I think the West could also learn a lot from if you take Haiti, for example, and whatnot.
Yes, I mean, yes, sure. Like, just like I said, each country has its own problems and its own systems that it has to solve its own problems in its own ways. It just cannot, like, you cannot be dogmatic when it comes to problems like this, solving your national question and all the things. Like, you cannot just tell anyone that you are not being left enough. Well, they're trying their best. You just imagine being in a country that has not even been independent for 100 years, and you tell them that you have to do this or you have to do that. Well, that's not how things happen. Like, things not happen like this. You just cannot say that you have to do this, you should be doing this, you should be saying this, you should be using this language, you should be. Nobody can do anything like that. Like, I mean, nobody should. Okay, so we all have our own ways, our own movements, our own languages, our ways of life, etc. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. But that does not mean that we have to model ourselves on what somebody else has done. That's practice.
Yeah.
We have to use revolutionary knowledge and also other people's experience, but then whatever anyone is building in their own country, after all, they are building in a system that's their own. Okay, so the context differ from one country to another. You cannot copy paste one thing and put it in another. You said IT, you cannot just copy paste US things into IT. You cannot do that. Similar.
Well, on that note, we were joined on this edition of 1+1 with Saheli Chowdury, who's part of the Orinoco Tribune editorial team. And Orinoco Tribune is your place for Latin American news and international affairs from a critical left perspective, from a Latin American left perspective. Saheli, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this all goes. I hope India goes well, and hopefully we have a sort of a Bolivarian revolution that takes place in India. I know I for example am quite influenced by the Latin American left, but thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to having you back on in the future to talk not just about Indian affairs, because there is so much that we didn't get into, but also Latin American affairs, so I hope to have you back on in the future. We will have you back on in the future, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, no, thanks Youri for joining me, as well as for giving this platform not just to me but to Orinoco Tribune, because it's important. And like you said, it's from a critical left Latin American perspective, and you also mentioned Bolivar. So yes, it's from a Bolivarian and Chavista perspective also. That is the perspective of Orinoco Tribune, and it's orinocotribune.com, so anyone can type that and go into the website and find news from inside Venezuela that you might not be having from other sources, especially in English, and also like from Latin America, Caribbean, and also from other parts of the world. We try to cover everything as much as possible. So like we are also on all social media, like everywhere, including Reddit, including Telegram, everywhere, TikTok, all sorts of places. So thanks a lot to Youri for giving this platform, and we hope to be continue this collaboration.
We definitely will. Shout till then, power to the people and death to the caste system and settler colonialism and capitalism.